Hi, boys and girls. So today we are going to be talking about timelines in our historical fiction books. By now, everybody's read at least up to chapter and through chapter 2 of Number the Stars. So we're going to talk a little bit about Anne Marie's timelines. And we're going to talk about both her personal timeline and the historical timeline of the events that are happening around her. So today, what I want to teach you is that in a historical fiction story, there's always more than just one timeline. As readers of historical fiction, we're responsible for paying close attention to both the personal timeline of the main character and the historical timeline happening around the main character. Those two timelines are entwined with each other. Okay, they live a parallel existence and they also overlap and connect with each other throughout the entire story. Each impacts the other's outcome. So to understand anyone, it's important to understand the way that that person's timelines intersect. It's important to understand how that person's personal timeline intersects with the historical timeline happening around them. So I thought it would be fun for us to try this out with me personally. So what I did was I laid out a rough timeline of my personal life, as well as the historical timeline that was happening throughout my life. So we can take a look here. So in 1981, I was born in Bronxville. At the same time in history, happening around me, Ronald Reagan was elected and became the 40th president of the United States. 1991, I graduated 5th grade. Right about that time, the Gulf War was happening, had started in 1990 and continued on for about a little over 6 months after that. 1992, I moved to a new school. I had to start new school in 6th grade. It was challenging. And right around that time, believe it or not, the World Wide Web, WWW, was made available for the first time to the public in 1991, not long before I changed new schools just in 6th grade. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody was using the internet or the World Wide Web at that time, but it was on its way to becoming a commonplace use. 1997, I got my driver's license. 1999, I graduated high school. Soon after that, the 9/11 terrorist attacks took place in 2001. 2000, right before 9/11 happened, I had moved to Florida to start college. Fast forward a little bit, 2007, not long ago, only 13 years ago, the first iPhone was released. I actually did not have an iPhone until way into the 2010s. But the first iPhone was released in 2007. The year after that is when I actually ended up graduating college. 2008, the Great Recession happened, which was a hard time in our country's history. 2009, big year for the country. Barack Obama became the first ever president of the United States to be a man of color. 2012, I finished grad school and became a teacher. In 2016 is when I started teaching 4th grade specifically. I had taught 3rd grade before that. 2018, I got married. 2019, I bought a house. And 2020, we find ourselves here living through the coronavirus pandemic. So it's important for you to see that as my life was unfolding, and you can see all of these personal milestones for me, at the same time, living a parallel existence was history. All of these historical events were happening as I was living my own life. So although they're parallel, they are also entwined in my own memory and in my own existence. And history impacted the way that I lived my own life and the decisions that I made and the things that happened to me, the interactions I had with other people, the things that I did for my job, for my own schooling. So it's important to realize that these two timelines live not only parallel with each other, but also converge onto one another. So let's do a little bit of this work with the character from our book, Anne Marie, in Number the Stars. So what I did was I laid out some things that I do know, but then there were a few details from the story that I was unsure about. So I want us to kind of try to do this work together, okay? So I know that for Anne Marie's timeline, I was easily able to place that in 1943, Anne Marie was stopped by the German soldier while running down the street with her best friend, Ellen. I was also able to plot in the historical timeline the historical events that are happening while Anne Marie is living her own life, that in 1942, Hitler recalled the German ambassador from Denmark, and then in 1943, Jewish people living in Denmark began to be rounded up for relocation. I have three other pieces of information that I'm having a little trouble plotting onto the timelines. I know that Anne Marie's dad told her a story about King Christian riding his horse through the city. We also learned that Anne Marie's older sister, Lise, was killed. We don't know the circumstances, but we know that she lost her life. And we also know that Denmark was invaded by Germany in 1940. So, I want you to stop and think for a minute. Where could I fit Anne Marie's dad telling her the story of King Christian, and where could I fit the death of Anne Marie's older sister, Lise? Stop and think for a minute. So the challenging part about this specific work is that in the story, these two events did not happen chronologically. Instead, what happened in the story was we heard about Anne Marie's dad telling her the story of King Christian riding his horse first. Then we heard about Anne Marie's older sister, Lise, being killed. However, Anne Marie's older sister was killed far before that story took place. So it can be very tricky when some things in a story or in a book don't happen chronologically, because it becomes your job as the reader to plot the events on a mental timeline, okay? In a historical fiction book, like many stories, the author doesn't come out and tell you everything verbatim or directly. You have to infer things and look and think through the story and decide for yourself where things belong on a timeline. So in fact, the first point on this timeline would be that Anne Marie's older sister, Lise, was killed. Then it would be that Papa tells Anne Marie a story about King Christian riding his horse through the city. Then we would jump to 1943. So again, while you are reading, you have to be aware of time jumps, and you have to be reading very, very carefully so that you can piece pieces of information together for an overall understanding of the story. Now, sometimes it's a little easier if we have dates and years. So for example, if I know that in 1942, Hitler recalled the German ambassador, and in 1943, the Jewish people in Denmark began being rounded up for relocation, I then know that if in 1940, Denmark was invaded by Germany, that would go first on that timeline list, okay? So it's important to realize how to use dates, but also how to infer pieces of information and then connect them and plot them on a mental timeline. So today you're going to be jotting in your e-reader's notebook like we have in days past, and you will be doing every day going forward. You can go to slide 12 for a recap of today's lesson. And then on slide 13, I want you today to jot some notes and ideas about how Anne Marie's personal timeline and the historical timeline she's living through are connected to each other. I want you to specifically focus on how the events happening around Anne Marie are impacting her life and the lives of the people she loves. For example, how is the German occupation of Denmark impacting Anne Marie's life and the life of the people that she cares about, her immediate family, but also her friends, okay? Think about all the things that you have learned so far in Number the Stars about the historical events surrounding Anne Marie, and think about and write about in your e-reader's notebook today about how those events are impacting both Anne Marie's life and the lives of the people that she cares about.